Question. What is the most common mistake someone makes when trying to purposefully meander? Great question.
Well, the first mistake would be not to prep. The first mistake is to think of purposeful meandering as riffing, as we'll see where this goes. We'll just kind of throw it out there and discuss it. That's the biggest mistake, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's the desire to be organic, and wanted the spontaneity to happen, and feeling like that can't happen if they're prepared, which, like we went over earlier, is not the case.
I don't want to rat out a show that I work with, but it was a show that when I was programming a sports station, and guys were convinced that they were better off when they just went, and that was where but one of them said, we just riff, man, we're great when we riff. We actually took some audio. I said, okay, give me some of the breaks you thought over this week that were great, that where you riffed, and then show me ones where we prepared a little bit. And the funny thing is, when all the ones that he riffed back together, when he listened to them back, when we all listened to them together, you could see their faces just kind of, oh wow, that wasn't nearly as good as we thought it was.
Yeah.
Oh, and I've got another point, because I've had this come up a lot too, with team shows that only prepare separately because they feel like if I'm handling this part of the prep, I'm handling this part of the prep, and if I share what I'm preparing with her or him, then it won't be organic on the air, and it won't. I've seen that work sometimes. Most of the time, that does not work. You have to also collaborate.
I will tell you, the only show I've ever seen that really work with was the Kid Craddock show, because Kid was such a great host, and he knew the cast members so well, and he set them up to succeed every time. And he didn't.
And you have to be very unselfish to make that work, and he was unselfish.
Yeah, and Kid was a relentless prepper. Not so much in compiling information and gathering and hunting, but thinking through how something was going to come off on the air. He was absolutely brilliant in that way. And he made every one of those cast members sound better because of the way he set them up. But that's the only time I've seen it really work effectively.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good point too. I mean, it comes back to prep, and I think that when we talk prep, sometimes a lot of folks are shaking their heads, going, "Oh my God, this is paperwork. This is drudgery. This is like doing my taxes." And if that's the way you're viewing prep, you're not doing it right. I mean, prep should be a creative, fun, freewheeling brainstorming process in which you get to create this great content that you go and execute on the air loosely.
And everybody's process is going to be slightly different, built around whenever you're the most creative. Like some people are more creative in the afternoon or the evening, and they're going to do some of their prep then. Some people are can do their best stuff at 3 a.m. as they're preparing for the show. So just don't feel like it's going to be the exact same for everybody.
Yeah, Andy had made the point earlier about the shows who don't prep together, and they keep content from each other, so they don't know what's going on. That usually comes with a really selfish host who doesn't want the other personalities to know what they're talking about. And a lot of times they hide behind the excuse of, I want to get a spontaneous response from them. But it's kind of a form of bullying, where a lot of times that host wants to be the star of the show and take these people by surprise, and they aren't prepared to have a great response or a great line. And they subconsciously, I believe, think it makes them look better.
It's sabotage, really, is what it is, because that person may not know where, what's coming or where they're expected to go. We work with a show in a market where that used to happen all the time. Well, I can't tell her what I'm going to say because her spontaneous reaction is so much better. But then the host would do it, and the co-host would be thrown off and would look silly or not prepared, or was awkward. So yeah, I think that is a form of sabotage sometimes.
And sometimes it's because the host has what they think is a really good line at the end, and they don't want to. They're so married to it, they don't want anybody else to have the line, and you can't do that. Even if you've written something great or prepared something great, you can save it for another break. It
Yeah.
doesn't,
Yeah.
you know.
How many times have you gone through a break and turned off the mics, and as soon as you do, somebody says, "Oh, I had a great story
Yeah.
that would have fit. I just thought of it. It's too late now."
Yeah.
Could all been taken care of if you talked about it beforehand. You could,
Yeah.
that way everyone can be personally prepared for it. Next question is from Truss Wiggins. He asks, what advice would you give prep-wise to a newer show where the hosts are still learning each other's personalities?
Walk before you run.
Yeah, that's the best piece of advice right there. Don't try to do too much.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing that you can work on is a new show in that situation too. And it's there's I believe a webinar on demand on the website, but talk about building your 5-star character brand. And one of the exercises we do with most of our shows is what we call the character profile exercise, where we actually compile the different character traits for each person on the show. And once you actually go through that exercise and get to know one another, so much better, and you actually commit that to paper, it's much easier to prep because you know where each personality is coming from.
Yeah, identifying and defining the roles is another key part. I think.
Yeah, and to clarify, roles are who does what and who's responsible for what and who's playing what. It's the position. If a sports analogy, it's the position that you play, and the character is how you play the position.
Right.
And with those, if the hosts and co-hosts don't know each other very well, that character branding exercise is really valuable because you start to learn things about each other and often about yourself that you can exploit on the air and really develop a character brand out of that. Iob says, hi, Tracy, Mike, and Andy. What is the best way for a show producer to prep topic arcs or journeys for hosts? Or should this part be left to the hosts to do it for themselves?
I think that depends on the show, doesn't it?
Yeah, it depends on the role of the producer. I'm a big believer in collaboration, and I think if you've got a good team and everyone can contribute, I think that the prep process should include brainstorming from everybody. I don't know that one person is necessarily or should be necessarily responsible for a story arc or anything like that. I think that heck, we do this with our shows all the time. We'll brainstorm with them, and some really good stuff comes out of that because everybody's coming with a slightly different perspective.
Yeah, and playing to each individual person's strengths. Like if somebody is really plugged into a certain thing, I mean, let them run with that, but don't task somebody to come up with. What you don't want is somebody throwing the work off on somebody else.
Right.
It's pretty easy to do if you go into it with what we call for the show mentality, where nobody is so attached to this is my idea, and because it's my idea, I want to cram it down everybody's throat. It might be your idea, but somebody else may have a better idea for how you treat that on the air or where that goes. And that's where collaboration comes in. And if you can create that atmosphere, that best idea wins, and the good of the show a rising tide lifts all boats. If we do the right thing for the show, every individual on the show is going to benefit from that, and their profile is going to become greater as well. So, and Mike's right. Some shows, some hosts want the producer to do more and to kind of line it up for them and be the talking head. I think Ryan Seacrest's show pretty much works that way, where Ryan comes in and he's going to read what somebody has created for him and put a little bit of personality on it. And other shows, you've got a host that is really good at show prep and really knows what they want to do. I work with the show at WKLB in Boston, Jonathan and Ayla. And Jonathan is a show prep machine. He does most of it. And they've got a great producer, Jim Clerkin. And Jim is terrific, but he doesn't have to go gather a lot of the content because Jonathan spends most of the day prepping the next day's show. And Jonathan has learned to share that prep and to brainstorm and collaborate with his co-hosts to bring more color into what he has prepared. So you're right. It is different with every show. Well, we look for every show's formula. What's the right formula for your show? What's the right way to do prep that works for you, that is usually based on some solid prep fundamentals?
Yeah, and if you're a host, a really good way to create a good creative environment for brainstorming is to let some other ideas let the other staff let their ideas win sometime. If it feels like it's always the host that has the final say and the call on all of that stuff, it's not going to be a very good creative environment where good ideas flow.
Yeah, when it comes to prep too, it's just like exercise. It's what are you going to do every day? What is something that you're really going to put some effort and time into? Andy said it before. Some people are more creative in the afternoon. Some folks like to plot a lot out right after the show. It really does depend. But once you find that formula that Tracy was talking about, it's show prep can be a lot of fun, and it shouldn't be a chore.
Yeah. Mike and I are working with Y100 in San Antonio, Frito and Katie, and they are so in touch with each other that there's no tug of war for who gets credit for this or whose idea this is. They can tell each other that's a bad idea. Let's do it like this instead. And it is so creative and so productive. And you can hear it in the success that show has had over a relatively short period of time in San Antonio. They've only been together there for a number of months, and they're already just flying through the ratings month by month. It's an exceptional show that is completely unselfish in how they approach it.
Totally collaborative. I mean, unlike some shows where one person does the bulk of the work, that is one where all the heavy lifting is shared between the two of them, and they really do a great job.
So if anybody has any questions, last call for questions. There's no more in the queue. If you have any, now would be the time to do it. Otherwise, we're going to wrap this up and move on. Oh, here comes one now. Kelly and Wood say, how much prep should be done the day before? Is it better to have a framework of and see where a break is going to go, or should it be regimented? I'm guessing it's based on the show.
I always say 80% is my kind of going number. Like if you can have 80% of the show prepared before not the day of, like day of, you're only doing about 20% of it is a pretty good estimate. And that gives you leeway. Now, granted, like you may have something really big come up that changes that, but that's a good general idea.
Yeah, I think ahead of time is much better. You can always move and rearrange. It's like an NFL team playing, right? They've got a pretty good game plan. They've figured out what they're going to do on Sunday, but there's always places to rearrange and to improvise and to call audibles. And there's very few things that happen the day of that you really need to move around. A lot of topics, I think we talked about this last time in teasing, a lot of topics are actually better if you take a day for the audience to get more familiar with it, and you spend some time actually deciding on a treatment for it rather than just reporting on it as a news story.
Yeah, you don't get a medal for being first to be on air with something.
We're not breaking news.
There's no award for that.
Right.
Yeah, you don't have to talk about Adam Levine the next morning after it happens. If you wait a day and develop a content, more people know about it, and it's just as relevant. It's just a day later, especially if you're making a story out of it. There's a seminar that you should check out about creating a prep system. It's called Prep Like a Pro. If you go to either tjohnsonmediagroup.com, you can watch that on demand for $9.95. If you're a member of Insiders at insidersradionetwork.com, you can watch it anytime on demand for free. It walks you through the steps of how to set up a system so you're always preparing your show about a week in advance, and you have all the time slots filled, and then your daily prep on things that are happening today that have changed. Something happens in the market that you want to change it. It becomes, as Mike says, less like going to the dentist. And it can be much more creative by just working a little bit further ahead, which goes into the next question from Tommy. It says, based on what you said about sharing prep content with your co-host, we all wear multiple hats, and it's a little hard to sit and have a prep meeting. So how can I execute better sharing ideas for the next day to my co-host?
Google Docs.
We have technology.
Technology. That's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, that's there's so many tools that we didn't have before. That, I mean, heck, Zooms. I don't care if you're in the same town. You know what I mean? Or FaceTime calls, or just talking on the phone, texting. What have you.
A lot of shows I work with have a working document, and you can do this through. It can be, Google Docs. It can be we like a software program called Trello. that is a collaborative tool that everybody can, it's card based and you can move things around. You don't necessarily have to sit down with somebody and prep out the entire show one-on-one. A lot of this can be done, in a collaboration set, and use the technology we've got.
Yeah, use the technology, but there's nothing that can replace that eye contact and one-to-one communication and collaboration. So if you can't do it after the show each day and spend 15 minutes to get on the same page for the next morning, come in earlier the next day. Come into your show 15 minutes earlier, 30 minutes earlier. Some shows come in an hour early to really get on the same page and go over the Eagles performed the same songs for 50 years. They sing One of These Nights in Hotel California every night. And every time they perform, they still get together 30 minutes before their performance. And they get on the same page with what they call their circle of fear. What's different about tonight? What do we need to review? Has anybody got any ideas to change anything today? So the circle of fear, I think, could be a real thing too. So find some time, even if it's just 15 minutes before the show, an extra 15 minutes to spend time in person.
Well, and in reality, what you find, like, as we talk about, because we talk about how important prep is, it sounds like to everybody that we're adding a lot of extra hours to their day. And in reality, when you figure out your system, it's about the same amount of work is what you find, because you've learned how to manage it better, you know? So you're not going from working a 10-hour day to a 12 or 14-hour day. It's the same.
Right.
Yeah. A couple of comments and we'll wrap this up. Jesse says this is great content and asks, did you all prep this session like you were a morning show?
Somewhat, yeah.
The answer is yes.
Yes.
We all knew the audio that was coming up. We prepped it. And we didn't rehearse the conversation, but everybody was prepared. They knew exactly what was going to happen on today's show. And we were able to perform loosely because we had prepared tight over the last couple of days. And finally, Chuck, a personal message for you, Andy. Chuck says, this is a great session. Andy, let's grab a beer and catch up.
Definitely. I'm just down the road from you. I'm in Frisco now, so I'm even closer to you, Chuck. So
there you go.
Thank you for coming to the workshop today. Tell all your friends about it. Make sure you click the button to subscribe to the channel. And if you have any suggestions for a future workshop, you can type them in the chat box, or you can send me an email, Tracy@tjohnsonmediagroup.com, TRACY@tjohnsonmediagroup.com.